They've walked free too many times today. These corrupt cops swagger into the courtroom, certain they'll outsmart the system yet again. But what they don't realize is that a woman they've overlooked for months has been tracking their every step. She's about to unleash a revelation that will demolish their world. When the evidence comes to light, will justice finally prevail? Or will the corrupt slither through the gaps once more? What do you think? Will these officers face the consequences at last, or will they slip away again? Share your thoughts below. This tale will stun you because once the truth hits, you'll never see corruption the same way. Let's dive in. Ashbourne wasn't always like this. It used to be a place where neighbors watched out for each other. A town where kids pedaled their bikes without worry, and local officers were part of the fabric, not above it. People trusted the system. They believed in the badge. But that was before the fear, before the silence. Now, Ashbourne is a town where doors are bolted shut early, where families hush their voices when the police are mentioned, where a routine traffic stop could mean the difference between getting home or vanishing into a growing list of mysteries no one solves. Trust in the police is gone. No one dares to keep it because in Ashbourne, speaking out doesn't just land you in trouble. It wipes you out. Silas Varnell was once a decent cop, or so people thought. He knew how to play the part, how to flash a smile and shake hands when it suited him. But beneath the polished surface, he was something else entirely. A man who didn't uphold the law but controlled it. Ashbourne was his domain, and he ruled it with power, cash, and dread. He decided who walked free and who languished in cells. Criminals who paid him stayed in the game, while those who crossed him were either locked up or 6 feet under. His wealth ballooned, not from his salary, but from dirty deals. Drugs, protection rackets, quiet payoffs. He didn't just accept bribes, he built the whole system to thrive on them. But every ruler needs muscle, someone to keep the line firm, and that's where Gideon Holt stepped in. Holt wasn't just a cop. He was Varnell's fixer, his enforcer, his hound. If Varnell wanted someone scared, Holt made sure they couldn't sleep. If a witness got too bold, Holt ensured they never reached the stand. They said he had a drawer full of bravery awards, but Ashbourne's people knew better. He was as dangerous as the crooks he pretended to chase. Once, a local reporter dug too deep, publishing pieces about missing evidence and unexplained riches among the force. The next day, his car was a charred wreck outside his place. Weeks later, he skipped town. Another time, a shopkeeper refused to pay up. 2 days later, his store burned down. The police called it an accident, but everyone knew. Holt didn't ask twice. His job was simple: keep fear alive. And it worked. Not everyone in the department was like them. Lila Carver joined with a different dream. She believed in justice, in doing right. She'd once admired Varnell, thought he was the leader she'd follow. That faith didn't last. The first time she asked why a case against a big-shot businessman vanished, she was told to shut up. The second time she saw drug cash vanish from evidence, she got a warning. The third time she watched Gideon Holt nearly kill a suspect in an alley and was told to call it self-defense. She wanted to believe it was just one rotten cop, that the system wasn't broken, just warped. But as time passed, the truth glared back. It wasn't one bad apple. It was the whole damn orchard. Lila had a choice: fall in line or risk becoming the next ghost in Ashbourne. The town wasn't a community anymore. It was a cage. People knew the rules. Stay quiet, look away, never defy the police. Those who didn't stick around long. Some tried. A few brave ones stood tall, spoke out. But one by one, they either fled or met accidents. No one fought back anymore, or so Varnell and Holt thought. What they didn't see, what none of them grasped, was that someone was already inside their fortress, watching, listening, biding time. And when the moment struck, when they least saw it coming, their empire would collapse. But the real question lingers. Will anyone in the department find the guts to turn on Varnell before it's too late? Ashbourne's people knew corruption owned their town, but what they didn't know, what even the filthiest cops hadn't caught, was that someone was already dismantling it. Someone who'd walked among them for months. Someone they'd dismissed. Her name was Mara Lysander. To most, Mara was nothing special. Just another quiet worker in the Ashbourne courthouse records room. She wasn't a judge, a lawyer, or even a clerk handling big cases. Her job was smaller. An assistant in the archives, filing papers, sorting case files, keeping old reports from getting lost. She was invisible, and that was exactly what she needed. Behind the tidy blouses and stacks of files, behind the polite nods and soft demeanor, Mara Lysander was far more dangerous than they could have guessed. She wasn't just a courthouse drone. She was an undercover FBI agent, tasked with tearing down the Ashbourne police from within. Every day, she sat at her desk, flipping through legal docs, arrest logs, and case reports. On the surface, she was just doing her job, logging old files, processing paperwork, keeping order. But beneath that, she hunted for flaws, patterns, gaps. Evidence that shouldn't exist, or worse, evidence that had vanished. Ashbourne's corruption wasn't just whispers. It was etched in ink. Altered court docs, missing reports, cases that should have ended in convictions but somehow fizzled out. Every paper she touched was a potential key to unraveling it all. Most wouldn't spot the cracks, but Mara wasn't most. She'd spent years studying untouchables, and she knew the bigger the lie, the messier it got. Somewhere in this mess of forged papers and fake reports was the thread to pull it all apart. She just had to find it. But Ashbourne's rot wasn't just in files. It was in the courthouse's silent halls, where workers had learned to keep their heads down and lips sealed. It was in the forced grins of prosecutors who knew their hands were tied, who'd stopped fighting cases they couldn't win. It was in the fear that coded every word, the way people paused before naming names. The system was shattered. Everyone knew it, but no one dared fix it. No one but her. As Mara sifted through records, tracing hidden deals and buried cases, one thing was clear. Time was slipping away. In a place like Ashbourne, secrets didn't stay buried forever. The diner was nearly empty, the air heavy with burnt coffee and old grease. A flickering neon sign hummed against the night's quiet. Mara sat in a back booth, fingers brushing her coffee cup's rim. She wasn't here for food. She was here for truth. Nolan Bryce slid into the seat across from her, his movements tense, eyes darting around before landing on her. He looked worn tonight, restless, like a man carrying a weight too big to bear. He skipped the chit-chat, reaching into his jacket for a plain manila envelope, setting it between them. "This," he muttered, tapping it once, "is what you've been after." Mara took it, pulse steady, grip firm. She pulled out a single photo, grainy, low-res, but damning. 2 Ashbourne cops, a warehouse, a bag of seized evidence swapping hands like a deal. In the background, barely lit, Silas Varnell. Bribery, corruption, a direct tie between the police and crime. Her stomach tightened. "Where'd you get this?" she asked, voice calm despite the stakes. Nolan hesitated. "A source. Someone who wants this over as bad as we do." He exhaled, glancing at the door. "But if I've got this, Varnell knows someone else does too." A chill hit her. "You need to watch yourself," she warned. "If they think you—" "They already know," he cut in. For the first time, his calm cracked, hands balling on the table. "They've been on me, Mara. My place was tossed, my car's been tailed. This," he nodded at the envelope, "this is a death warrant." Silence stretched. Mara's gut screamed to tell him to run, but she knew better. There was no running from Varnell's kind. Nolan's shaky breath broke the quiet, fingers tapping the table once before he stood. "You keep it. If I go down, this doesn't vanish." Their eyes met, a silent vow passing between them. Then, without a word, he left. She should have stopped him, said something, but she didn't, and that was the last she saw of Nolan Bryce alive. The records room was still, thick with the smell of old paper and faded ink. Metal filing cabinets lined the walls, stuffed with decades of police reports, court rulings, and case files. Most forgotten. But Mara Lysander didn't care about cold cases. She sat at her desk, scanning a closed report. To anyone passing, she was just another swamped assistant drowning in paper. In truth, she was hunting, cross-checking, tracking evidence that shouldn't be gone. She'd been careful, never pulling too many files, never drawing eyes. But tonight something felt wrong. That itch on her neck, like she was being watched. She flipped a page, keeping her breathing even, though her pulse raced. She was right. Across the room, near the doorway, Lila Carver's eyes were fixed on her. At first, Lila hadn't thought much of the quiet archive worker. But then she noticed things. Why was a low-level assistant pulling reports on big cases? Why did she care about files already settled? Why did her laptop snap shut whenever someone neared? Lila had been a cop long enough to spot patterns, and Mara's didn't add up. She hadn't told Varnell or Holt yet. Not without proof, but she was watching. And Mara knew it. Mara risked a glance. Lila stood there, arms crossed, face blank. Not accusing, just studying. It was the look of a cop without enough for a bust, but sure something was off. Their eyes locked briefly. Mara weighed her move, then smiled. Harmless, polite, nothing to see here. Lila didn't smile back. She tilted her head, lips thin, thinking. After a long beat, she turned and left, casting one last look. A warning, a test. Mara exhaled, fingers gripping the file. Too close. Lila wasn't dumb. If she hadn't started digging, she would soon. And when she did, Mara wouldn't just be the quiet assistant anymore. She'd be a target. In Ashbourne, targets didn't last. The tension had built for days. Mara felt it. Lila's eyes lingering too long. Always in the same hall, same room, same empty space. It wasn't chance. Lila Carver was watching, and tonight she was done observing. The courthouse halls were nearly empty, lights humming softly. Most had gone home, but Mara stayed, flipping through another file she shouldn't have. Footsteps approached, slow, deliberate, stopping behind her. She didn't need to look to know who. Working late again? Lila's voice was smooth, edged with something new. Mara glanced up, face neutral. Someone's got to keep this place straight. Lila didn't smile or budge, arms crossed, studying Mara like a riddle she couldn't crack. Mara set her pen down, tilting her head. Something on your mind? Lila leaned on the desk, fingers tapping the wood. I was thinking today about a weird pattern I've noticed. Oh, Mara said. Yeah, Lila replied. I've been around this courthouse long enough to know which cases matter, which files get touched, which don't. And you? She raised a brow. You're real curious about files already done. Mara forced a chuckle. I like to be thorough. Lila didn't laugh or blink, just watched, waiting. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. Lila had seen too much. But she hadn't snitched yet, which meant she wasn't sure. Lila was at a fork. She could run to Varnell, Holt, any of the dirty cops and sound the alarm. But she hadn't. Part of her was doubting the system she'd sworn to. Mara needed time. I don't know what you think I'm up to, but I'm just doing my job, she said, voice steady, casual. Lila studied her a long moment, then pushed off the desk. Maybe, she said and walked away. Mara didn't relax. This wasn't over. Lila was still watching. The only question now, when she chose, whose side would she pick? The courthouse was meant to be a bastion of justice. Outside, chaos brewed. Reporters yelled, cameras flashed, protesters clogged the sidewalks, some demanding answers, others backing the officers on trial. But inside, it was heavier than anticipation. A silence laced with certainty. Silas Varnell believed he'd already won. He strode in like he was at a feast in his honor. Uniform crisp, stance firm, smirk bold. Behind him, Gideon Holt, Bryce Oren, and Lila Carver followed, faces blank, steps tight. But Varnell was different, no fear, no strain. This wasn't a trial to him. It was a performance the public needed before his system buried the charges. Like always. For years, he'd twisted the law, hid the truth. Today would be no different. He had top lawyers. Money bought the best. But the real power wasn't in the room. It was behind the scenes. So he stepped in smiling. To him, this wasn't Judgment Day. It was proof justice in Ashbourne was a mirage. Across the room, DA Serena Vex gripped her pen, knuckles white. She'd built this case piece by piece, and now it was fraying before it started. That morning, a call came. Smooth, calm, authoritative. Drop it, Ms. Vex, for your sake. No threats, just fact. A hint this wasn't just about crooked cops anymore. It was bigger, darker. She'd wanted to fight, to scream the truth loud enough to win. But now, watching Varnell smirk, the judge's quiet nods to the defense, doubt crept in. The kind that whispers, then roars. What if the system was never meant to work? Varnell eyed her from across the room, reading her tension, her grip, her slump. He knew that look, defeat. The case was dead. So when the judge entered, the room hushed, and the trial began. He leaned back, calm, waiting, for Vex to break, for the system to shield him, for this to fade like the rest. Justice didn't live in Ashbourne, power did. And Varnell had held it for years. What none knew. The game was about to flip. The trial hummed along, the air thick with expectation. Every seat was taken. Reporters, town officials, Ashbourne folks who'd lost faith in justice but came anyway, hoping today might differ. At the prosecution's table, Serena Vex sat rigid, jaw tight, mind racing. She'd expected Varnell's arrogance, his smirk, the rigged game. But not this. Right now, Silas Varnell was playing his ace, grinning wide. His lawyer stood, smoothing his costly suit. "Your Honor," he said, voice slick, practiced. "The defense submits new evidence proving my client's innocence beyond doubt." Vex's stomach dropped. New evidence? Impossible. She'd scoured every file, nothing could clear him. Unless, her heart thudded as the lawyer passed a folder to the judge, then grinned at her. "We've secured police reports and affidavits from key witnesses, confirming my client's non-involvement and framing these charges as a smear against a decorated officer." Murmurs swept the gallery. The judge skimmed, nodding. "This is weighty, Ms. Vex. Your response." Her fists clenched. She hadn't seen it, but she knew. Fake statements, doctored reports, altered timelines, maybe forged footage. All lies dressed as truth. And it looked legit. Varnell glanced her way, smiling. Not a smirk, a taunt. "You can't touch me." Then he chuckled like the room was his stage. "Ms. Vex," his lawyer pressed. "This case seems built on missteps, reckless claims, a pause, a smirk, or perhaps a personal grudge." Murmurs grew. The judge tapped his gavel. Order. But the damage stuck. All eyes were on Vex. Would she crack like the rest? Varnell bet on it, lounging like it was a farce. To him, it was. Evidence didn't matter when the game was fixed. In Ashbourne, it was his to run. What he didn't see. The script wasn't his anymore. The courtroom had been Varnell's turf for years. He'd called the shots, who won, who lost, who vanished. Today was meant to be another notch in his belt, with fake evidence in play and his lawyer steering the story. He already saw the headlines, "Hero Cop Cleared." Then the doors swung open. Sharp heels clicked through the hush, slow, steady, firm. Heads turned. A woman in a sharp black suit stepped in, posture tall, face unreadable, radiating quiet power. Mara Lysander, but not the meek records assistant they'd ignored. Not the invisible worker. She was something else now. Gasps rippled, murmurs buzzed. Even the judge faltered, unsure. Varnell's smirk slipped. For the first time, he looked unsteady. Mara advanced, heels striking the floor, each step precise. The room held its breath. She stopped at the prosecution's table. Serena Vex stared, stunned, then faced the judge. "Your Honor," she said, voice firm despite the storm. "I'd like to present a key figure in this case." Pause taut like a wire. "Special Agent Mara Lysander, FBI." The words hit like a shot. Shock spread, a collective gasp. But the only reaction Mara cared about was Varnell's. His fingers twitched, jaw clenched. For a split second, his mask cracked. The air shifted. This wasn't his game anymore. For the first time, Silas Varnell didn't know how it'd end. The courtroom went silent. Not calm, but heavy, tense. Mara stood steady at the prosecution's table, the moment's weight clear. This was it, Silas Varnell's collapse. She reached into her briefcase, pulled out a small black flash drive. Plain, unassuming, lethal. She held it up. "Your Honor." Her voice rang clear, strong. The prosecution presents key evidence from a federal probe into the Ashbourne police. The judge adjusted his glasses. Proceed. Mara plugged it in, hit play. Varnell's voice boomed. If you want things smooth, you know the drill. Ice clinked. A slow exhale. You pay, we look away. No stops, no hassle. A pause, then colder. But if you hold out, if you get clever, you know what happens. The room exploded. Gasps, whispers, reporters scribbling. A defense lawyer leapt up. Objection. This could be fake. Unverified. Mara raised a finger. Not yet. There was more. She set down a worn phone. Cracked, weathered, the last thing Nolan Bryce recorded. She tapped it with care, honoring its weight. The video rolled. The lie unraveled. Dark, shaky footage. Heavy breathing. Nolan's voice, low, urgent. If this gets out, know the truth. Shadows shifted. A man on his knees pleading. I didn't do anything. A gunshot. He fell. For cops loomed, unfazed. Gideon Holtzbat moved the body. Nobody saw. The screen cut. Nolan's last words. This is how they do it. Always have. 5 seconds of silence. Then chaos. The gallery roared. Reporters shouted. A juror gasped. The judge's gavel slammed. Mara didn't flinch. She met Varnell's eyes. No smirk now. No words. His fists clenched, knuckles white, jaw tight. Desperate, trapped. He opened his mouth, denial maybe, but nothing came. He knew it was done. His system, his lies, his power, gone. Mara stepped closer, voice low, for him alone. Not so untouchable now, are you? Varnell's world burned. Mara held the match. For a man who'd been untouchable, this was unthinkable. Silas Varnell had owned Ashbourne. Pulled strings, silenced threats, buried proof. The law bent for him. But now he was caged, and he knew it. The courtroom spun, shouts scrambling, gavel pounding. Varnell didn't hear. His mind raced for an out. There wasn't one. His empire crumbled, and for the first time he felt fear. Then instinct kicked in. He shoved his chair back. It crashed and lunged. Not at his lawyer, not at Mara, toward the door. Gasps erupted as he bolted. Pure panic, no plan, just survival. He plowed through, knocking a spectator down. A woman screamed. A reporter's camera smashed. This wasn't the untouchable man they'd feared. This was a cornered rat. As he reached the door, a voice sliced through. Stop him! A blur, FBI agents closed in. 2 steps more. Then a tackle slammed him to the floor with a brutal thud. He groaned. Thrashing, his hands pinned him, cuffs snapping shut. The same kind he'd used on the innocent. The irony choked him. This is a setup, he spat, wild. You can't do this. I own this town. Mara loomed over, calm. Not anymore. His reign ended. They hauled him up, breath ragged, face red. Mara felt the victory's weight. Ashbourne had suffocated under corruption, and today justice won. But a question gnawed. Was this the end, or just one piece of a bigger web? Men like Varnell didn't work solo. Corruption didn't die easy. The courthouse doors flew open. Ashbourne's people had waited years for this. They'd lived in fear, watching their town rot. They'd whispered in shadows, flinched at every cruiser. But today they saw justice. Varnell and his crew were dragged out, cuffed, badges gone, power stripped. Reporters surged, cameras flashed, capturing the fall of the untouchables. A cheer erupted, triumph. Some wept, relief crashing over them. Others hugged, voices lost in the roar. For the first time in ages, Ashbourne felt hope. Mara stood on the steps, watching. She should have felt victorious, relieved. Instead, a cold doubt tugged at her. Her phone rang. She answered after a beat. Static. Then a voice, deep, calm, amused. You think you've won? A chill hit. The crowd faded to noise. This, it purred, is just the tip. Her grip tightened. Who is this? No answer needed, they weren't bluffing. A chuckle. Enjoy your win, Agent Lysander. Click. Silence. She lowered the phone, pulse steady, instinct screaming. It wasn't over. Somewhere far off, in a dim room, a man sat, face shadowed. The city skyline glowed against the glass as he sipped whiskey, slow, unbothered. His phone buzzed faintly from the call. He smirked. Varnell was a pawn. Mara Lysander had just stepped onto a bigger board. As she stared at her phone, the weight of the fight ahead sank in. One question echoed. Who really pulled the strings? In Ashbourne, justice wasn't just won. It was fought for, every day. The war had only begun.